morning all. My paper is titled Lessons of Sustainability, the Folk Reading of a Ritualistic Landscape. So there are two major entities which will be discussed in this paper. The first one is cultural landscape, which is understood as a combined work of nature and man. According to the UNESCO World Heritage Convention 1972, it includes the physical aspects of geography and the cultural expressions of humankind. And the second entity is the cultural region of Kolathanadu, on which the study is anchored to. So the Kolathanadu sprawls between the productive belts of Perumba River in the north and the Valapattanam River in the south, and it can be seen tucked between the forested hills of Western Ghats in the east and Arabian Sea in the west. It roughly coincides with the present-day administrative districts of Kannur and Kasaragod in the Indian state of Kerala. So this roughly demonstrates the conceptual and contextual framework on which the research is anchored to. And typical cross-section across this region shows the fertile lowlands which are rich in alluvial soil, the lateritic midlands, and the forested slopes and hills, which is a part of the Western Ghats. So, yeah. So moving on to, the aim of the research is to establish the interdependencies between agrarian landscape and the ritualistic landscape generated by Theyyam, to analyze the multitude of ways in which liturgies of Theyyam communicate exemplars of ecological and social sustainability. So now moving on to what is Theyyam itself. It's a ritualistic performing art which is prevalent in the region of Kolathanadu. So you can see that the traits of if you consider the geography, towards the north it has mixed traits of Bhutakola, and towards the south it has mixed traits of Tira, and in between the two rivers Perumpa and Valapattanam, you can see that all the traits of Theyyam are balanced and the unitary strength of Theyyam is at its zenith. So the aspects of sustainability intrinsic to this folk ritual are explored through three facets which are discussed in this paper. At the onset, it discusses the role of Theyyam in shaping its sacred landscape, simultaneously getting shaped by the singularities of the geography. And it further inquires into the temporal and spatial dimensions of Theyyam performance to establish a reciprocal relationship with its ritualistic landscape. And finally, it analyzes the case of a folk performance through the spatial lens to decipher the layers of interdependencies within the sacred realm. So, as discussed, you can see that the typical cross-section gives you an, three sections of the forested highlands where slash and burn cultivation or shifting cultivation, which is also called swidden cultivation, was also the midlands where garden cultivated lateritic lands, and finally the coastal wetlands where the wetland paddy cultivation was very prominent. So this evolution of this multi-crop agrarian system, which supported the swidden agriculture wetland paddy by the beliefs and worship patterns of the region as well. A comparative reading of the agricultural calendar and the Theyyam festivities attested that the occasion of the Theyyam performance coincided with the agricultural cycle of the region as well. Like for example, the initiation rituals which started in the 10th day of the lunar month, and the harvest festivals were often combined with Theyyam worships, where the fertility cults and forest spirits were appeased in the cultivated land. So the entire Theyyam season was in between this, which also coincided with the agricultural season. So that establishes the association of the temporal traits of the ritual with the landscape. Now we move on to the spatial aspects of it. So Theyyam performance are often centered around a sacred geographical setting called Kavu. So there are several scholarly studies which has attempted to define the concept of Kavu and to scrutinize its structure. The most important of which is the one done by Dr. Madhav Gadgil. This is a person whom we all Keralites remember once in a year or once in 2 years when the flood hits Kerala. However, his book Ecological Journeys, the 20th chapter of his book, which is titled Grooves of the Gods, explains how the idea of sacred grooves originated as the remains of human subsistent regimes itself. And it presents significant evidence which proves that sacred grooves originally were nothing but agricultural lands transformed by the shifting cultivator, hunter-gatherer and the pastoral groups. So in the chronological and chorological evolution of agrarian culture, these production landscapes flourished from slopes and hills to the fertile alluvial coastal lands and to the lateritic garden lands, which ultimately resulted in the evolution of associated cults and sacred spaces within these eco zones. This diagram presents an interpretation of the poetic landscape mentioned in the Tamil Sangam anthologies and its association with the Theyyam deities. So the Sangam poetics describe 5 distinct categories of Tamil landscape called Thinais. They include Kurini, which constituted the Sweden cultivated hilly forest, Pale, which was the parched zone formed due to the seasonal changes, Mulle, comprising of the pastoral hills and slopes, Marudam, or the paddy cultivated wetlands, and Nedal, which is the long coastal belt. So the undulating terrain of Kolathanadu region identifies itself with the physiographical zones of Thinais in Sangam anthologies. Also, most of us know that historically this was a region, most of the part of Kerala was a part of the larger region of Tamil Nadu. Just like the topographic features, the Theyyam deities of Kolathanadu as well can be precisely linked to these physiographic zones and their associated subsistent modes as mentioned in the Sangam text. So thus each terrain was associated or is associated with a group of Theyyam deities, and the Theyyam of the coastal zone can be seen different from that of the forested hills, mountains, slopes and wetlands, and they had its own paraphernalia with which it came from. For example, the coastal lands, it was connected to the trade and the trade routes and stuff, whereas in highlands it was towards the Sweden cultivation, etc. But currently it can be seen that the geographical spread, it is spread throughout the geography because of the various transmigration patterns which happen due to various reasons like military expeditions, warfare, seasonal job seeking, etc. So this is a sample mapping. So you can clearly see a clustering of that community in the geography. So this is a sample mapping of social groups within specific terrains. So this is a particular community of toddy tappers where you can see that there are smaller social organizations which together forms the geography of that particular ritualistic landscape for that community. And similarly, there are other mappings done for each occupational groups. The communities or castes were dealt together based on the occupation. So this is a GIS based mapping done for all the groups. So in continuation to it, this section will discuss the coexistence of Theyyam with the natural landscape and its idiosyncrasies which resulted in distinctive cultural and social formations of the region. The hierarchical social structure of the region was spatially manifested and evident in the temple-centered gramams. You have temples in the center and other occupational groups positioned around it. But when it came to Theyyam performance, the sacred spaces turned out to be a microcosm of the indigenous settlement itself, and it proposed a parallel universe to the existing feudal agricultural hierarchies. Tillers, who were the marginalized groups in the existing social order, came to the central focus. The ritual functionaries were replaced by the priests and officials from the Theyyam worshipping communities itself, and the other occupational groups contributing can be seen spatially dispersed around it. Thus, the microcosm of the settlement created during a performance reflected the collective social resistance, which in turn stemmed from the existing feudal hierarchy of the social system. And the final part of the paper attempts to demonstrate the strong ecological perspective interwoven into every aspect of Theyyam worship. This is a case of Kunnathur Padi, a sacred hill associated with the forest deity named Muthappan. So the landscape of Kunnathur Padi sprawls over the highest peak in the forested hills of Udumbumala. The yellow mark shows the location of the sacred performance space. From the entranceway down the road, stone paved steps followed by a steep climb leads uphill through the rugged forest path marked by huge tree roots, potholes and stones, and you cannot see any sacred shrine or any permanent built entities dedicated to the deity here. Instead, you can see that the existing hill slope is conveniently cleared and shaped into a gallery space for the spectators to watch the performance, and the gallery overlooks a mud-swamped courtyard where the performance and the associated rituals are conducted. The central space had the sacred shrine, which is nothing but a narrow cave under the gallery space, which is partially covered by a thatch, and you have thatched huts built for the officials and patrons of the region of the festival. So during this 1 month long hustle and bustle of the festival, after this festival, the entire region is left untouched, devoid of any human intervention for the rest of the year. The dense forest, which became the vibrant sacred seat of the forest deity, goes back to its tranquil lethargy for the rest of the season. During this dormant phase, devoid of any outside commotion, the landscape detached from its sacred meanings merges back and the indigenous species together with the tribal god regains its territory. So all the sacred meanings are detached and it goes back to the natural mode itself. Thus, Kunatur Padi can be interpreted as an ephemeral landscape which generates and regenerates sacred meanings within it. It precisely demonstrates the optimal interface between humans and nature, in which the resources are ideally mobilized with mutual respect and reverence in the backdrop of a folk liturgy. To discuss the observations and conclusions, can I finish the slide?
It's okay. So I'm going to, it's a beautiful presentation and I can clearly see that you're quite immersed in that research. My question, it's a bit of a chicken and egg. It's a bit of a chicken and egg question. You showed that temple formation, right? And how that more or less the movement of the people somewhat follows the larger distribution of the the festival and the people and their uh, inhabitation of the land. You had those rings, right? And my question is, does the movement accommodate itself around the way in which the temple is, or do you think that at some moment the temple itself, the components of the temple were organized to accommodate the festival? It's a bit of a chicken and egg question because you don't know which came first, but I'm just trying to push the envelope of establishing this relationship.
Yeah, I think that's what the paper is about. It's about a reciprocal relationship between the both. When we say it is a ritualistic performance, we also are talking about a community who was following these liturgies and which was a part of their life. So I think it's how the community along with the god has been responding to the land by shaping itself and thereby getting shaped by itself at the same time.
But like the Sangam literature, did you find any literature which started describing this relationship?
Not really, because this is largely a tribal. So this is largely a tribal system of worship wherein we cannot find anything written about it, but then largely from the oral traditions and our understanding of what is the relations is what these more or less are gathered from.
All right. Thank you.